Coca Cola, one of the world's most iconic brands, is indeed colorful and at times controversial. Here are some notable aspects of its history. In today's video, we're going to talk about the dark history of Coca Cola and its rise to become the most successful and yet controversial soft drinks company. It all started in 1886 when John S. Pemberton began to make the original beverage at his chemical company. Originally containing both cocaine and forms of caffeine, the drink was marked as a tonic for ailments. As crazy as it sounds, that wasn't that absurd for the times. Pemberton's syrup was taken to a local pharmacy where he added it to soda water. Frank M. Robinson, Pemberton's business partner, came up with the name Coca-Cola as well as the design that everyone knows so well. Pemberton's creation wasn't his for long, as investors soon jumped on the potential of the beverage and expansion took off past the beginning territory of Atlanta. When Coke went global. In 1919, the Coca-Cola Company was sold to a group of investors led by a man named Ernest Woodruff. And then in 1923, his son Robert W. Woodruff was elected president of the company. Woodruff expanded the company and brought Coca-Cola to the rest of the world. Coca-Cola began distributing bottles as six-packs, encouraging customers to purchase the beverage for their home. In 1928, Coca-Cola was introduced as the sponsor for the Olympic Games, giving the company even more international exposure and starting a tradition that continues to this day. In 1941, the U.S. entered World War II and the demand for Coca-Cola from the U.S. soldiers serving overseas increased tremendously. Under Woodruff's leadership, the Coca-Cola Company began building bottling plants overseas to meet demands. From the mid-1940s until 1960, the number of countries with bottling plants almost doubled, laying the foundation for Coca-Cola to do business abroad. The new Coke failure. Coke fans call it Black Tuesday. On April 23, 1985, the Coca-Cola Company took arguably the biggest risk in consumer goods history, announcing that it was changing the formula for the world's most popular soft drink and spawning consumer angst the likes of which no business has ever seen. In spite of the fact that tests showed the new formula tasted better than old Coke, customers believed otherwise. The new Coke failure happened because Coke tried to be something it wasn't. Many people consider the introduction of new Coke as the biggest marketing blunder of the 20th century, so the story behind the giant mistake is fascinating and informative. By 1985, war was raging in the Coca-Cola duopoly, Coke and Pepsi. In the late 1950s, Coke outsold Pepsi by more than 5-1. It built its dominance, one of the most powerful expressions of brand leadership ever, the treat little words, the real thing. One of the best ways to position a number two in a category is to go against the number one, and that's the strategy Pepsi used against Coke. Pepsi thought that if Coke was the original, it was the choice of older people, and Pepsi execs had to go against that position. Pepsi's solution was to focus on younger people with a Team Pepsi, the choice of a new generation. That began in the early 1960s and it worked. Pepsi cut Coke's lead in half. What was Coke to do? They couldn't give up there. It's the real thing positioned first, used as a slogan since 1942. Pepsi found an inherent weakness in Coke's strength, and Pepsi put Coke on the ropes. In the 1970s, Pepsi came out with the Pepsi Challenge. This was a series of blind taste tests that found more people preferred a sweeter taste to Pepsi. Pepsi communicated these findings with lots of television commercials casting good and happy-looking young people. Coke, called headquarters in Atlanta, trembled with worry. Its own research verified Pepsi's claim. Many remember the last line of Pepsi's tune, "You've got a lot to live for, and Pepsi's got a lot to give." This inspired Coke to do a similar hip campaign. "I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony." Both campaigns were examples of great advertising from a period we now call the Don Draper era, a reference to the popular Mad Men TV series. Pepsi made gains throughout the 70s and into the early 1980s. It began to outsell Coke in the supermarkets. It was bad enough to lose the taste tests, but the market share lost too. Something had to be done. As Coke saw it, the problem was with its product. So it did what seemed to make the most logical sense. It began working on a new formula. Pepsi was the first recipe change since 1903 when it removed cocaine. After 250,000 taste tests and almost 2 years, they had a formula that beat Pepsi in the blind taste tests. To beat Pepsi in the marketplace, Coke couldn't have two directly competing colas on the shelf, so it decided to stop producing the original Coca-Cola and introduce new Coke. That they thought would solve their big problem with the Pepsi Challenge. they would now beat Pepsi with a better tasting cola. Water shortages. We all know that the exact formula to make Coca Cola is kept secret. It will probably remain that way for a long time, if not forever. While we don't know everything that's put into Coca Cola, we do know that they most definitely use water. You can't make more drinks without water, so it's not surprising that the sugary drink has a lot of water in it. This, however, becomes a problem in countries that have issues getting clean water on a constant basis. It takes a lot of water to make just one bottle of Coca-Cola, and this has resulted in poorer countries not having any access to water due to Coca-Cola factories using up all of the liquid. Not only do people not have enough water to drink, they don't have enough water for their crops, meaning they also miss out on watering, consuming, and making the food they need to survive. Employees dying. You wouldn't think that working at a Coca-Cola factory could result in anyone dying, but that's exactly what happened to several Coca-Cola factory workers in Colombia. It was in 1986, and the day started off relatively normal when the factory was suddenly ambushed by a bunch of wildlife members of a nearby paramilitary group. A Colombian Coca-Cola executive tried to get the men to leave, but the men refused and they ended up killing the executive. This resulted in the paramilitary group giving Coca-Cola an ultimatum: be quiet and leave or die. Of course, the employees left the factory as quickly as they could, where the group took over the factory and made it theirs. Coca-Cola still receives criticism for this, as they did very little to find out why this murder went down in the first place. Not to mention, when the factory eventually opened up again, most of the original workers were simply fired. Advertising. Coca-Cola obviously wants to be the biggest beverage company in the world, and at this point it's safe to say that they probably are. Although their size hasn't stopped them from buying out companies in order to make as much money as possible. This is what happened in India in 1977. Coca-Cola had begun their expansion to India, selling their products at local shops. Unfortunately, they didn't do as well as they planned. Few people bought their product, and Coca-Cola lost a lot of money, so they left before they could lose any more cash. Then in 1977, an Indian company called Thumbs Up appeared, and they sold their own fizzy drink. Coca-Cola had already left, leaving the opportunity for another company to take its place. Coca-Cola ended up buying the Thumbs Up company and rebranding it. This caused people to think they're giving their money to Thumbs Up, but it really ended up in the pockets of Coca-Cola. This means that Coca-Cola is selling Coca-Cola without people even realizing it. Coca-Cola concerns. Can Coca-Cola kill you if you drink enough of it? Apparently it can. Coca-Cola faced criticism when a woman from New Zealand apparently drunkers after death by drinking too much of the soda. She was only thirsty, and she spent most of her day gulping down bottle after bottle of Coca-Cola. The coroner who observed the woman's body said that many of her medical conditions will be linked back to her Coca-Cola addiction, which raises the question, just how addictive is Coca-Cola? There's no doubt that many people drink Coca-Cola several times a day, but what they never acknowledge by the company is that it makes their particular ingredients so addictive that they have the ability to lead to an adult's death. The coroner did say that if she hadn't been drinking so much Coca-Cola, then she'd still have been alive today, something Coke never really faced up to. Marketing towards children in the 1990s, Coca-Cola was trying to tackle the idea of getting the younger generations to consume their product. The 90s were a time where things were slowly changing in regards to what we ate and drank, but Coca-Cola was quick to jump and make certain that kids would drink their products, and their products only, while at school. The company would hand over money to schools, which would result in Coca-Cola giving you rights to sell their drinks in said schools. This resulted in one New York school getting a stadium with a giant Coca-Cola sign, which meant kids were being advertised to even when at school. Schools were then urged to sell the products to the kids despite how unhealthy too much of the product can be. Schools were even threatened with making less money if they sold drinks like milk and fruit juices. What are your thoughts on Coca-Cola as a company? Let me know in the comments section below. Well, that wraps up the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay notified about our uploads. I'll see you next time. Until then, peace out.